quite a few people here already, so I am going to get started. Please do keep introducing yourselves in the Q&A. I think it's nice for all of us to see who else is with us in the space, where you're coming from. Great. So thank you for joining me for this session, which is all around how to write about your trauma without re-traumatizing yourself. My name is Bryony Hutt. I've spent my career so far all in the charity sector. So for the last 15 years, I've been working in various roles across fundraising, communications, and more recently in the staff wellbeing space. And there's certainly things that I've learned from that, which has informed some of what I'm sharing today. But most of what I'm sharing is based on my own experience of writing about my trauma, which is something that I started doing just this year. So quite new into it, but have got some stuff wrong already and learn a lot along the way. So I'm gonna speak for about 10-15 minutes and just share a few of my experiences and my sort of top 3 things that I've learned so far that have been really important for me looking after my mental health whilst I'm writing about my trauma. To say up front, so I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and that's what I write about, but I'm not going to be talking about my experiences today. So there's no sort of trigger warnings up front here. Hopefully none of the content is going to be too heavy. But I also wanted to acknowledge that trauma comes in many forms and all shapes and sizes. So whatever, if you're here because there is something that's happened in your life that was traumatic and that you maybe are thinking of writing about, whatever that was, if it affected you in that way, it's valid. So please don't sit there and feel that what happened to you doesn't count as trauma. What I'm sharing today applies to all kinds of situations, anything really that's very kind of emotionally weighty for you. Hopefully the suggestions that I share today will be useful in your context. And actually, trauma is something that most of us experience in some form, sometime in our lives. And particularly if you belong to an identity which is marginalised, so I'm queer, then unfortunately we tend to have even more trauma in our lives and be more vulnerable to those things. So yeah, solidarity to anybody else who sits in any of those groups or has gone through anything like that in their lives. But I think it's interesting because trauma is so universal and so shared, but it's not something that we actually talk about all that much. And it's still something that feels quite scary to talk about. I certainly found in my own experience, so I had a lot of trauma which was repressed. And when those memories came up just a couple of years ago, I knew from very early on that I wanted to write about it and that I wanted to share my story in some way. But it took me 2 years before I actually got to the point of being able to start putting pen to paper, and quite a few more months after that before I felt confident enough to publish anything. So there are lots of barriers and good reasons to be kind of cautious about sharing your trauma in written form. But I think there's also a lot of really good reasons to do it. So for me, I think primarily the first reason that I wanted to write was as a way of me processing my trauma for myself. And by writing and publishing, it really helped me to take ownership of my story and also to make more sense of the things that had happened to me and the situations that had led up to them. So it's partly for me, but it's also a bit of a reach out to other survivors as well. And I see it a bit as paying back, paying forward what I took from other people who shared their stories before me. There's lots of brilliant people out there who have written about their experiences. And I, especially when I was in the early days of coming to terms with what happened to me, those stories were just an absolute lifeline for making me feel less alone and for giving me some hope and seeing a path forwards. So that's been a big driver for me wanting to also share my story, is to kind of pay that forward and pass that on. And hopefully this session is another way of doing that. And I'm really looking forward to a bit of conversation at the end, and hopefully hearing from others' experiences amongst the attendees too. So that's kind of my motivation. And as I said, I've only started writing this year. So I've only been publishing on Medium since the end of May. But there's lots that I've learned very quickly, actually, of what not to do when you're writing about trauma. So my first piece of advice is pace yourself. And that was something that I got wrong at the beginning. I think coming from a background of working for large organizations, I had a kind of corporate capitalist mindset, I think, coming into this. Looked on Medium, saw how frequently other people were posting, and immediately was kind of setting myself little targets of, you know, I want to be writing enough to be publishing every other week and build an audience and build my followers, which actually wasn't the reason why I wanted to write in the first place. I just very quickly got caught up in the platform and trying to find a way to measure success. But actually, I found when I put that pressure on myself, I find it really hard to write. And particularly when you're writing about trauma and things which weigh very heavily on you emotionally, it's not something that you can really put that kind of pressure on, or even a firm structure, in my experience. I find that the best way to approach writing about trauma is to write when I feel like writing, and to not put any pressure on that. So I don't set myself any targets of how many hours I want to have sat down and been working on my articles. I just take the moments when they come and listen to how I feel. And whether I write for 10 minutes or whether I'm up for writing for an hour that day, I just try and celebrate any little step forward that I make in that work, rather than kind of having these targets, which actually I found mostly ended up just being another stick for me to beat myself with, which was not the point, given I came into this to be a part of my healing process. So I think keeping in mind kind of why you're doing it is really important, and also just really being kind to yourself and pacing how you approach this, so that you don't go too fast and emotionally overwhelm yourself, or like me, just end up beating yourself up when you're trying to actually do something quite positive. So that is sort of tip number one: pace yourself. And I mentioned there kind of emotional overwhelm, and that is another risk and another thing that was quite a barrier to me when I was starting to write, is that I would write and then feel really overwhelmed, and then carry those emotions into the rest of my day and find it very hard to kind of put them down. So again, I tried to think of ways to change that. Part of it was in the pacing. So if I'm writing for 10 minutes and I'm already feeling quite emotionally charged, like it's too much, I step away. But I don't just step away now. I try and do something to decompress. So this is my second tip, is to always decompress after writing. At first, I told myself that I was going to decompress by always going for a walk when I finished writing, which was, I don't know why I decided that was a good idea, because I actually quite struggle with getting out of the house for a walk, even on a good day. So it wasn't really working. It was something I was telling myself I should do, but I wasn't doing. So since then, I've found some smaller, easier ways to kind of shake off that emotion when I've finished a little stint of writing. My favourite ones of those is one, just to put on a song that I love, blast it up really high volume, sing along if it's something that I know the words to, maybe have a dance. Anything that really involves moving your body is really helpful for helping move those emotions through and prevent them from getting stuck. If any of you have read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, you'll know that trauma is held very much in our bodies as much as in our kind of emotions and our thoughts. So those physical things really help to kind of move it on, even if you're not feeling kind of hugely emotional in the writing, it's probably somewhere in your body. So doing something like that, whether it's putting on a song and dancing, or the other thing I do quite often is qigong, which is a form of mindful movement, a little bit like Tai Chi. It's very kind of gentle, flowing movements, and it's a really nice way to kind of reconnect with your body and leave behind the subject matter that you've been writing about. If anyone else in the group who's listening has other ideas or things that you do to decompress after you've been writing about trauma, please feel free to share them on the Q&A, and at the end I will make it so that all these comments are visible to you. And I've just got one final piece of advice from my experience so far, which is about being prepared for the naysayers, because there always will be some. And actually, when I first told my dad that I was planning to write a blog about my trauma, he was very concerned. His concern was that I was going to get negative comments that would be harmful to me in my kind of healing journey. And it's a really valid concern. And I think something that you should think about before you post things that are kind of traumatic in your life, because you need to be in a place where you're able to take it if people respond in a way that you weren't hoping for. And there's a few ways that I kind of manage that for myself. So part of it is about thinking carefully about the content that I actually post. So I only write and publish articles about things that I've already really done the processing of, rather than anything that's still feeling really raw and fresh, or anything that I'm really actively working through in therapy or in my own work with myself. Because whilst I want to be vulnerable, and part of the reason I'm writing is to kind of shed the shame and put things out there without that. But you want to make sure that you're in a strong enough place to do that, basically, and not leave yourself open to harm. So content is really important. The other thing is community. I found having other survivors in my life who I can turn to for support and who understand what I've been through is really helpful to know that I've got that backup should anything come up which is difficult for me. That's partly through friends, partly through a writers group that I'm in with other survivors, and also just through an online forum with other survivors, which has been a lifeline, not just when I've been writing, but actually through my whole healing journey. And the final two things that I've done for myself is really reframe negative comments. So at first, the first time I got a negative comment, it did hit me a little hard. I will say I was a little bit shaky reading it. But I was able to kind of take a step back and really think about what it meant to get that comment. And to me, I think that showed evidence that my story was reaching people who maybe need to hear it. They might not be willing to listen yet, but they're perhaps people that haven't been exposed to these issues, or who have, a maybe misplaced way of looking at the world around these things, and maybe need a bit of education about trauma so that they can be kinder to the people around them in the world. And if they're not at the place where they're ready to hear that yet, that's fine. But them seeing my article and taking the time to comment on it shows that I'm not just preaching to the converted, and I think that's a positive thing. And I try to see it as that, so that I can celebrate when I get a negative comment rather than seeing it as a bad thing. And the other thing I've done is really celebrate the positive comments. So you won't be able to read this because it's going to be backwards on the screen. But this is something that I did after that first negative comment. I'll hold it up a bit longer. But it's basically, I looked at all the positive comments on my Medium articles and picked out a few quotes and basically just covered a piece of paper in them so that I could see all of the people who had appreciated what I had put out there and the people who it meant a lot to. And I now actually keep that on my desk where I write, so that I have a reminder of that to help, outweigh anything negative that comes my way and keep me motivated in what I'm doing, and aware that, I'm doing this for a reason, which is to reach people who need it. And if that's happening, even if it's just one person, then it's worth it. That brings me to the end of my sort of three tips that I had to share. I can see there's a couple of questions already coming up in the Q&A. I think they're already just showing up. So please continue to put your questions in there, or if you have your own advice and experiences that you want to share, you can ask to join me on audio and video, and I can let you come up on screen and share your experiences as well. I'm quite new to this world, so these are the 3 things that I've learned along the way so far, but I'm sure I'm going to get more things wrong and learn more along the way too. Great. There's a couple of questions in the chat which I'm going to answer first, and then I'll come to you, Love, and bring you up on screen with me. So the first question here is from Reality Check, who is a writer on Medium who I love and has actually written a really great article about why it's difficult to write with trauma. So recommend checking them out. They've asked, did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym, and what made you decide not to use one? And yes, I did. I had to have that thought process before I started writing. And I think the reason I decided not to is because I've been quite open about my trauma with the important people in my life. So they already know. So nothing that I'm kind of sharing more publicly is going to be kind of a big shocking surprise for the people who are in my immediate sort of circle. So that was one reason why I felt more comfortable writing under my real name. And also, I think I did it because I wanted to be able to share it with, like, on my social media. I wanted to be able to link it up with my kind of career in future, talking around social justice stuff. So it made sense for me to keep it under my real name, and I didn't feel there were huge risks to me in not doing so. But that isn't the case for everybody, and I completely respect people who make the other decision and do write under a pseudonym. I think it's up to every individual to really look at their situation and the context and the risks that are posed by kind of putting your real name to what you're writing. So it's a personal choice, and yeah, big respect for whichever way you decide to go. Thanks, Anthony, for your question as well. So how would you advise us to respond to critics who read about a traumatic experience we've had and they dismiss it as anecdotal, or they come in with a canned line of, it's not about you? This is a good question. And yeah, my first negative comment was completely dismissing my whole experience. Again, I think it's quite personal how you respond to these things. No response is an option. It's always an option, and you don't have to kind of credit people's negative comments with your time and attention of getting back to them. It's completely fine to just leave them unanswered, because most people who are reading your work and are supportive are going to see that comment for what it is, and kind of not need you to kind of add anything more on that. So ignoring is great. But if you do want to go back to someone, just to clarify something, or if you think that I did reply to one of my comments because they sent quite a lengthy response telling me why I was wrong. So I felt the need to respond, and I felt like it gave me an extra opportunity to make more of my points in that space. So for me, it felt like a good opportunity to continue the conversation I'd started in my article. But I think it's completely up to you in that situation. And yeah, like I say, ignoring is always a good option. Right, I've got a few people asking to join me now. So I'm going to try and bring you up, if I can work out how to do it. Ursula, I'm going to bring you up on screen. So if you're able to join me, then the floor will be yours. Let's see if Ursula is going to appear. Hi, Ursula.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can't hear you. Let me see if I can fix my audio.
We can hear you, Ursula.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I still can't hear you. I don't know what's going on with the audio here.
I think...
Let me see if I can look into settings. Yeah, it says my iPhone microphone is on. I can try it again.
We can hear you.
I know you can hear me. I see your thumbs up, but I can't hear you. That's the issue. Is your sound on? Can you check?
Yes, it should be. Can other people hear me?
Yeah, I think something's off with your sound.
It seems like everybody can hear both.
I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear what you're saying. I don't know what to do. So your sound is on, right? Give me the thumbs up if it is. Oh, gosh. Let me try reloading again. Let me see if that's going to change it, okay?
Okay. I'm going to try someone else. Let's give this a second go with somebody else and see. Lillian, I'm going to try and add you in and see if you can come on screen and speak. And if Ursula rejoins us, we'll all have a conversation.
Okay, try again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
and I can't hear you again. Oh, what a bummer. I don't know what to do with the system. Oh, here you are.
Yeah,
I
you
can
got
hear
me?
you now.
Hey,
Yes,
well
I
done.
did.
We're in.
Thank
Always
you.
some tech teething problems.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me on screen.
Of course.
What was there a question that you had, or was there an experience that you wanted to share?
No, I just kind of like came through because I'm new to Medium. I just signed up a few days ago and I noticed the topic, which is trauma, how to write about your trauma without re-traumatizing yourself. And I'm actually writing about, I wrote an article about my trauma, I haven't published it yet. And my focus is going to be writing about personal stories, mostly traumatic, and just see how I can stay sane in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear your experience of writing for Medium and all that.
Great. Maybe did you only just join? Because I've spoken for a little bit. We were just getting into the Q&A section.
I just joined. Yeah.
Okay, so you may have missed a little bit, but that's okay. I'm gonna move on, and we'll see, because I think there's a few more questions in the chat.
Okay.
So,
I'll mute myself.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm not sure if the others who were in the moderation zone are wanting to come on and ask questions or share experiences. So please let me know in the chat if you are wanting to come on screen and kind of share something. Otherwise, I'm going to just answer the questions that have come up in the chat here. So Kate, thanks for your question. You've asked any tips for meeting people where they're at. I'm thinking of reaching people who aren't so trauma informed and think that the dialogue doesn't apply to them. This is a really great question, and not one that I have a solid answer for. I think how I approach it is to just, obviously I'm speaking from my own experience, and I think that gives you a kind of legitimacy to talk about these things. And I just try and keep it quite simple and explain, like, rather than kind of putting in too much about my experiences, I try and kind of take some really key points that help me make a point about what the experience of trauma is like, whether that's around being believed or whether that's around the kind of aftermath and dealing with PTSD symptoms. I try and kind of weave in a little bit of personal experience with a little bit of like credibility of like links to sources which have got statistics that kind of back up my story. I think being able to pull in both sides of those things can maybe help. But you're right, I think we need to be careful that we don't end up just speaking in therapy speak, which isn't accessible to everybody. So keeping things just human to human and plain English, I think, can help us to help us to get our stories reaching people kind of outside of the bubble of those who already know. Wendy, thanks for sharing around using your real name. I completely agree. That was part of my motivation too, was around kind of reducing shame and stigma. And that was a big motivation for me writing. So it felt right to use my real name and kind of have that authenticity behind it. So yeah, but again, as I acknowledged before, there's lots of reasons why you might not be in a position to be able to do that, and why it might feel too risky, or whether not risky to you, kind of your safety, it might be risky to your mental health. So looking after yourself first and making sure you're really thinking through your needs is really important. Donna, I see a question from you in the chat. So how do you address topics that may include information about a loved one or friend without violating their privacy? This is a question I think about a lot. And yeah, I'm not sure I actually have an answer to it yet. This is probably one that I'm still working out for myself. In some, like, I have written some things which talk about my parents, and they've read them and learnt some things about themselves from it, which was actually really, really helpful, but quite scary when I wrote it, because I hadn't really asked permission. Not that it was super personal things, and I think I would if I was going to be sharing that. But it really, yeah, sorry, I'm bumbling here because I don't actually have an answer. And because I think, again, it comes down to the context of those relationships and what it is that you're sharing. Some things I would ask someone before sharing them. So there's certain things with my mum that I'd probably speak to her about before I published anything that was written about that. And then there's other people who, you know, I don't necessarily feel deserve privacy. So I might write about them, but maybe without naming them. So I'll write about what they've done and how I feel about it and my perspective on it. But I don't ever include the names of, for example, my abusers when I'm writing about them. But obviously they don't really fall into the loved one or friend category. So yeah, that's kind of how I've come at this so far, but very much on a learning journey with that. Donna, did you want to come up and say something about that after I've bumbled that answer? Because I can see you've asked to share. Let's see if Donna's going to appear here. It always seems to take a minute or two. I know we're at 8 o'clock, so if people do need to go on their way, obviously, please do. I'm going to give it a minute to see if we can get Donna up here. Also, thank you for your comment, Lacey. It's really, I'm glad that's been useful advice, because I certainly was the same when I first started writing and was exhausting myself unnecessarily.
Can you all see me or hear me?
Yes, I can see and hear you.
Oh,
Hi, Donna.
Hello.
Thanks
so much. Is it Bryony?
Bryony, yeah.
Bryony, thank you for sharing. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Be vulnerable. And, you know, you seem like you have just a real authentic, vulnerable presence. And I hope that that is really comforting for the people that are reading. I will check out your articles. I haven't read you yet, I don't think. I'm so committed to sharing my story of trauma, and part of my story of trauma incorporates a little bit of my family, specifically one of my daughters who went missing. So the public knows about that because I had put missing posters up all over the internet, and through the police and stuff. So part of her story people already knew, right? So at this point, when I'm sharing, I really work hard not to share too much about her part of all of this, right? And so that's been important to me. I'm committed to it, so I try to do my best with that. Um, but I was just kind of wondering what other people's experiences have been, around this.
I went to another great session that was on today, actually. I now can't remember the name of. Oh, actually, I'll be able to see it in my agenda. Here we go. It was called "Honoring My Truth: The Price of Family Approval," and I sadly can't remember the woman's name, but she was talking about having shared a story about her mother and her extended family being very unhappy about what she had shared. So I think, these things are really complicated when we're sharing, often about the worst things that have happened in our lives. They've usually involved other people in some form. But yeah, everyone's situation differs, and I really respected her for, she posted it, and she really, even though she got that backlash from family, she really felt like she needed to share that, and it was important to include that. And yeah, I think just really interesting to hear different people's experiences, because we're all grappling with similar questions, but with our own context that we're kind of applying them into. And I think the more other people's experiences you hear, then it helps you to really work it through for yourself and decide what's right for you. So yeah, thank you for coming up and sharing your experience too.
All right, thank you.
Annalise, did you also want to share? You are muted at the moment, and I'm not sure how to unmute you. Are you able to unmute yourself, or does it say you're unmuted?
It's okay.
Ah, there you are. Hello.
For me and my experience, I have found out that when you keep the pain inside, it comes out another way, and it contributes to depression. So what I do, I turn whatever pain they put me through, I write it as fiction. I create everything about it. I create how it happened, why it happened, who contributed to it. And then after lessons learned, I heal. Then I find ways to heal myself and encourage everybody. You can't keep the pain in. It's gonna hurt you more than the ones who inflicted it upon you. So I just write a story, and people who experience it will understand it is true. Others will think it's fiction, and they'll never know. They'll never know that it is, and you are helping yourself and helping others, because when you learn, the pain will go away, and so will the regrets. So I no longer have regrets, and I'm not. When humanity does me cruelty, I am no longer angry. I learn from them, because by their actions, they are giving me the opportunity to read their minds. And some of them, with the cruelty that they give to me, they are creating their own exit door, making my decision easier to let them go. And I hold the forgiveness key. Only I can open that door with my forgiveness. And some of them you have to forgive. Others, they have to go. That's my piece. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, thank you. That was really powerful, and yeah, amazing to hear that you're at that point in your journey where you can really say, I've got no regrets, and being able to.
Oh no,
all those lines.
There are lessons. When you learn from the cruelty and the pain, and you don't repeat it, don't share it, don't give it back. That's how you're gonna heal, by not sharing the cruelty that humanity gives, and your life gets better, and you get better, and your attitude changes, and the positive attitude helps everyone around you. So when they create their exit, let them create their exit door. They'll create it for you, and you don't have to do anything.
And slam it behind.
Right, and you have the forgiveness key. You have the power.
Thank you, Annalise. Thank you for joining me.
All right.
Okay, Elaine, were you wanting to join as well? I can stay about 10 more minutes, so I'm here till 20 past for anyone else who wants to come up and share. Hi, Elaine.
Hello. I just wanted to say that I just want people to know that it's never too late. Some of us are what you call slow learners. And I was so deep in shame and stigma that, I kept the silence for over 40 years to do with everything that had happened. Partly to protect my family, because there was a civil lawsuit, so it's not like it was not public. But I hid so much. I even managed to hide most of that trial. And now my father has dementia. He's 90. And now I can finally just be honest about all of it. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge relief.
I'm glad that you've got to that point. And thank you for coming up and sharing that, because I think it's a really important message, because so many of us have been through these horrible things that actually it can take a really long time to be ready to and be able and feel safe enough to be able to face those things. So it takes a lot of courage. So I applaud you for being able to take that space now and take your voice back.
Thank you, and thank you for this. This has been amazing today.
Thanks, Elaine. Okay. Next on my screen, I have. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right, but Chiamiso. I've just tried adding you, so hopefully you'll be able to come up and join me. I'm also really happy that they don't just kick us out after the half hour, because this is amazing to have this space to meet some of you and hear from you. So thank you to everybody who has come online. Oh, we've got two at once. Let's start with Chiamiso and then come to you afterwards. Hi. Thanks for joining. Oh, you seem to have frozen.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to talk about. Is this fine? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
You're back.
Oh yes. Hi everyone. I wanted to talk about like recurring. I mean, I heard you earlier mentioning how when we don't let go of the trauma, it gets stuck somewhere in our bodies, And as for me, I've been through a lot of traumatic experiences, and then I couldn't find ways of decompressing. So I was kind of sort of rearing the pain over and over and over. So I've had like my abuse story started with me from childhood until my adulthood. So I was dealing with it by writing poetry. So it ended up just marring my poetry in the sense that I only wrote painful poetry. So I wanted to ask, how do I move out of the pain into positive light? I mean, how do I transition from being a pain poet to writing about other things? Because I can't seem to, I think I become more of myself when I write about pain or unattained things than when I write about joy,
That's when your creativity comes out.
So I'm just wondering, how do I?
There's a lot. I mean, so many poets are pain poets, really. I think pain and suffering does inspire. It seems to inspire creativity and poetry more than the positives. I don't know. I guess maybe it needs to be a conscious practice of maybe just creating space for yourself where you're not writing it for anybody else, that you're just kind of creating a little bit of space to work that muscle of writing about positive things, even if they're not as good. No one needs to see them, but maybe trying that so that you're just kind of doing it a little bit more. You know, I do things like have a gratitude journal and things like that to just try and help my brain focus a bit more on the positive things rather than being so caught up in all the heaviness of it. So I don't know, maybe you can write, maybe you can do that, but in poetry form.
Yes. And then I just wanted to appreciate your tip on decompressing, because I think when we get to like identify with a feeling for too long, it tends to become part of us inside. So like just combating it with a counter emotion kind of helps keep the balance. So thank you so much for that tip. Thank you so very much.
No problem.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think that's enough for me.
Well,
thank you so
much for coming up and sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, Wendy. Oh, so Sophie's still here. We have got Sophie still. Sophie, are you able to come off mute so that you can speak?
Hi. Do you see me? I don't know how this is working. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay. Well, the camera is on, but for some reason.
Have you got is there like a little slide over the camera? It looks like there's something covering it.
It does look like that, but I don't have anything on my camera. So, okay. Well, that's that. Well, thank you for doing this. And of course, I missed the front part of it. I think the talk that you gave. So I'm not familiar with your writing history. Because my question is, because I didn't necessarily want to share necessarily, but I'm curious about how would you share, to what level do you share traumatic experience? Because some of the other ladies that have come on, I mean, it seems, you know, that sexual abuse is top of the list usually for the kinds of trauma that we have a tendency to smother for years and years. So there's the element of divulgation. What is that word? Divulging. What is the word I'm looking for?
Divulging?
Divulging. Yes, thank you. I'm putting a hard G in there because I'm Francophone. That's the reason. I'm speaking it in French. Sorry. So there's the element of divulging. You know, while people are still living, it's kind of it's an obstacle for me anyway, as to how much you can actually allow yourself to say without getting into legal situations, or even being disowned by your family. I mean, all kinds of things can happen. So you know, I would anyway have a hard time divulging or talking too much, and you know, you put the lid on it for your entire life, and at some point you need to get it out. But so what I'm wondering is, I would like, you know, what do you think of this? How much do you actually say? Under what conditions? Because there's always your readership as well. I mean, are they interested in getting all the details? Are they going to feel like it's speaking to them, or are you just whitewashing your own trauma by airing your dirty laundry? You know, it's kind of like that. So that's what's been holding me back from getting into that kind of writing. So just get your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's all important stuff to think about before writing about these kind of things, because you're right, there can be consequences of doing so, and you need to kind of think that through and make sure that you're only risking things that you're willing to risk. But I mean, I write in some of the gory detail, I would say, because I feel part of the reason I write, as someone else was saying in the comments, is about kind of letting go of shame. And so then that means for me writing about the harder stuff and airing my dirty laundry, as you say. And I am airing it because I think it's important to be aired, because it's only in kind of putting these things into the light that we kind of can let go of the shame and break that stigma, and also get society talking about the reasons why these things happen, so that we can maybe move to a world in which they perhaps happen a little bit less often. So that's why I kind of write in detail, and don't really censor myself, I suppose. But like I say, I'm very lucky in the kind of support network that I have around me, that I don't feel that I'm putting myself or kind of my future career, or the people I love in any danger of any sort, which isn't the case for everyone. But there's other ways of writing. You know, you can write about your trauma without explicitly saying that you're writing about your trauma. As was just shared, I'm really terrible at names, so I'm really sorry that I've forgotten your name, who was just up here, but was sharing about writing fiction. You know, you can write fiction where you're not saying it's necessarily real, but you're finding a way to process and write about your trauma in a more kind of a distanced way, which can be protective. Or you can write under a pen name, so people don't always write with their real names, and that's another form of protection, where you can kind of have a channel to be able to get that stuff out, but without the ramifications of that you might have if you published under your real name. So I think this is my answer to every question, is that it's a really personal thing, but you know, it's up to you how much you want to share. And I think like I've definitely taken a lot of strength from being very open about what's happened to me, but that's not for everybody. So yeah.
That's from a personal level, but I'm wondering, because at Medium, we often hear that we should be writing and keeping in mind our readership, or the people who are going to be reading. So, you know, that's so I'm like referring again to, you know, because I appreciate your comment, and thank you. I've taken notes. But regarding the dirty laundry hanging element, you know, how do you tailor what you write to your readership? I mean, do you have to compromise to some extent, or do you have to do you have a cutoff? To what length or what depth, or how do you keep in mind your readership? How do you know what they want to see or hear before you write it?
Honestly, I don't think you can. And I also think it's, you know, it really depends. You don't know who your readership is going to be. So there might just be one person who really needs to hear that one detail, you know, and so I try not to think about the audience when I'm writing. I try to just think about like what's my point and what helps me make my point, rather than worrying too much. Are people going to be turned off by me sharing this detail or this detail? Because if they are, that's fine. They can move on and go on to something else. But I include those details because I feel that there might be someone out there who that's actually really important to.
Well, I'm just concerned about the guidelines that Medium wants the writers to respect. I'm thinking more along the lines of that. You know, those guidelines. The quality.
I guess on that front, I think the important things is that you're not. I mean, as someone's kind of said in the chat here, thanks Chevy, around not giving the abuser's real name. I guess anything that's kind of things like that, which or anything that's really hateful and like obviously hate crime is not something that's going to be allowed on there. So sticking to those things is good, so that we're not kind of using Medium as a site to, I don't know, send people to someone's house because of something they've done to you. Obviously that wouldn't be appropriate. But I don't think that Medium needs you to hugely censor yourself in terms of telling your story, because if you're just telling your experience, that's your experience, and you have ownership of that, and it's, you know, your right to be able to share that.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Sophie. Sorry, there are a few more people who I know who wanted to talk, but I am having to log off now. But thank you so much to everybody who joined. Thank you to everybody that shared. That was really powerful, actually, to be in this space with you all and to learn from you and have your questions. And thanks for all of the comments in the chat there as well. So I've not been hugely good at speaking and moderating at the same time. That's a new skill that I am yet to master. But thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the sessions throughout the day. Bye-bye.